One of the things I constantly receive are questions from viewers, either on YouTube or by other means. Most I respond to in the question and answer videos. This next question, however, I feel deserves a video in itself. I was recently asked to describe the personality of the administration during my time. To begin with, at the time of my induction, the official boss of the Lucchese family, Vic Amuso, was incarcerated and still is. He was convicted following a trial in June of 1991 and subsequently sentenced to life in October 1992. And throughout the years, there's been numerous people placed in the acting boss position. With that said, during my time, it was Matty Madonna who held that position. I had actually met Matty before I was inducted at Rigoletto's on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, a restaurant owned by longtime Genovese captain Patsy Perillo. Matty and I had a mutual friend named Booby Sorensen, and we had a discussion about him that day at the restaurant. Anyone who truly knows Matty will agree that he speaks extremely loud. And I don't know if it was due to a hearing issue or if he just naturally spoke that way. Nonetheless, when speaking with Matty, you immediately knew he was a man's man. He had served over 30 years, and as I've mentioned in the past, he teased me about only doing 17 outside the club in the Bronx the first time I was there. I actually reminded him that day that we met before. There were certain people who viewed Matty as a junk pusher because that's what he went away for. The majority of the guys liked Matty, but some didn't. Matty represented another person that was handpicked by Vic to be his acting boss. Some of Vic's earlier choices didn't turn out so well. After being released from prison, Matty was straightened out with the Lucchese family, and not long after, given a captain position with no men or crew because he was still on paper, federal parole, and he was eventually made the acting boss. As I mentioned, Vic's past performance is similar to a time loop that repeats itself. He chooses guys who he believes will be loyal to him, and more importantly, people he thinks he can control. And more often than not, this turns out not to be the case. When greed sets in, all that loyalty and control goes to the wayside. I've spoken about Matty receiving a letter from Vic that was given to him by Robert Spinelli, which involved cutting up millions of dollars and Vic's instructions to induct Spinelli into the family. Matty did neither and disregarded Vic's wishes. So just like a high percentage of the guys in that life, Matty being no different, he was very greedy. At the times I was at the club up in the Bronx, I noticed that Matty liked to arrive late and make a grand entrance. He also liked when everybody made a big deal when he walked in. Personally, I don't believe without Vic's intervention that Matty on his own would have ever became a boss. I always describe Joe DiNapoli as being a character. If you had the opportunity to speak to Joe just for 5 minutes, you'd get a good taste of just how sharp he is. Joe's an old-time gangster. Both his brothers were with the West Side, and all of the DiNapoli brothers had tons of money. Most people heard me mention there are 3 types of guys in that life: capable guys, earners, and politicians. And each category is not limited, as some guys fit all 3. So besides being an earner, Joe is a major politician, which goes hand in hand with the consigliere position. I like Joe, but witnessed his treacherous side firsthand. Joe liked to put guys in a trick bag and set them up, so to speak. Attending a social club is part of that life. I can't say I loved going, but there were times I enjoyed myself and ate good and had a lot of laughs. But Joe is a club guy. He loves being in the social club and is definitely in his element. At the club, Joe was always hot and had the air conditioners blasting. One day, Joe Cafe, who has diabetes, was so cold that he had to go to his car and retrieve a sweater. When Joe DiNapoli heard this, his answer was, "Too bad." He didn't care for Cafe, and if Joe didn't like you, forget it. He'd put the screws to you. Both Matty and Joe DiNapoli were at my induction ceremony, which Matty conducted. And to my surprise, he spoke extremely eloquent that day. I've also previously mentioned how Joe DiNapoli speaks in riddles. Rather than speak about a subject, he speaks around it, which obviously comes from his years spent in social clubs, where the FBI is known to place bugs in. Occasionally, Matty would be dressed up, but for the most part, he dressed casual. As for Joe, he was always dressed in his uniform, which consisted of slacks, shoes, and a button-down shirt or pullover sweater. And both Matty and Joe were typically in good spirits. Stevie Crea, the underboss, was a different story. 9 times out of 10, if you've seen Stevie, he had a face on. It's one of the things that wise guys and the FBI all agreed upon, and that was that Stevie was living proof that money don't buy happiness. One day we took a trip up to the club in the Bronx, and when we got there, in a perfect display of his personality, Big John got out of the car with a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue. And he tells me it's Stevie's birthday today. Naturally, I was pissed, and I said to him, "John, why didn't you tell me it was his birthday?" But he just said, "Don't worry, I'll say it's from all of us." Which, by the way, when he handed the Johnny Walker box to Stevie, he just said happy birthday. So I walk over to Stevie, kiss him hello, and say happy birthday, and that I didn't know it was his birthday. He turned to me and said, "You're full of shit." He said it with a smile, but I'm a firm believer in paying attention to things said in jest. Stevie, like Joe, was a social club guy and could always be seen sitting at the card table playing cards. Throughout his lifetime in the mob, he made millions of dollars, mostly through construction. It was Stevie who would deal with the captains a lot, and because of this, it was common to hear among the Lucchese family the following words: "Stevie's our guy," essentially meaning he was the one running the family. I think most of the cause for Stevie's bad moods was due to frustration because he felt he should have been the boss. And if you watch closely enough, he had an air about him where he felt he was above Matty and Joe. On the surface, when all three were together, they appeared to get along, but there was definitely division among them. You had certain members who kissed each of their asses. For example, Joe Cafe kissed Matty's ass, and Joe DiNapoli despised him. Big John kissed Joe DiNapoli's ass, and Matty wasn't too crazy about Big John. Stevie and Joe, without question, headed that Bronx faction that hated the guys from Brooklyn. We know the reason why Joe DiNapoli, like Big John, who was a Brooklyn guy, again, as I mentioned, he saved his life from a heart attack while they were together in prison, and also because Big John kissed his ass. Over the years, many people questioned why I didn't go to the administration to report some of the things that Big John was doing regarding me. It would be Joe DiNapoli, the consigliere, that I would have to speak to in order to put in a beef over Big John. How do you think that would have turned out? I personally knew anyone who brought a beef to Joe against someone he liked or someone lining the administration's pockets would walk away on the wrong side of that decision. Let me remind everyone to like this video if you haven't already. And for anyone who'd like to show their appreciation for videos like this, you can do so down below. In 2017, there came a point in time when the only administration member not in prison was Stevie. I've told this story before, and let me remind everyone, it was me who first explained that the Lucchese family went through a transition within the administration. As we know, the Brooklyn faction wanted to gain control of the family again. There were several discussions on what would happen if there was any pushback, and it was decided that Stevie Crea was target number one. But to his credit, he's been around long enough to predict that would be the outcome. Consequently, there was no pushback. And trust me, it's not what Stevie wanted, but he understood the days of the Bronx controlling the family were over. And more importantly, he also knew he was about to be indicted. I remember being told that Stevie expects to be arrested, so he must have had someone tip him off. Presently, the only one out of the old administration not incarcerated is Joe DiNapoli. He no longer holds the consigliere position, and I'm not sure if they made him a captain again or just put him with one of the Bronx crews. But one thing is for sure, wherever it is that Joe spends his days, whether in a social club or some restaurant, he's definitely cursing those guys from Brooklyn.